Thank you. I want to begin with a phrase from the Whitsun Weddings, a phrase that gives this paper its title, This Frail Travelling Coincidence. In Larkin's poem, the phrase refers to the dozen wedding parties Larkin observed on his train journey from Hull to London. It gives us a picture of Britishness at the time, but it also gives us a way of thinking about movement, proximity, and about how lives briefly align. What interests me today is how Philip Larkin and that Larkinian way of writing about travelling from Hull, travelling on a train, reappears in the writings of Yiyun, the Chinese-born American writer and professor of creative writing at Princeton University in the United States. And I want to think about why Larkin matters, particularly in relation to grief, illness, and COVID-19, and what Larkin means to us now. Lee's agency website says she grew up under communist austerity, where she had a fierce appetite for stories and never felt there was enough to read, despite absorbing the works of Russian writers. Since moving to the United States, she has developed close bonds with the books of other English language writers, from William Trevor, Catherine Mansfield, Rebecca West, and Ernest Hemingway. However, they have neglected the fact that Yiyun has also developed a close bond and a meaningful connection to the University of Hull, where she travelled in 2017 to see the Philip Larkin exhibition. So we'll talk about her books, Dear Friend, From My Life, I Write to You in Your Life, Where Reasons End, both published in 2017, her short story collection, Wednesday's Child, and her recent memoir published in 2025, Things in Nature Merely Grow. I discuss her essay in the Before Times, where she reflects on her journey to the Brimore Jones Library and how she has written about the poet and University of Hull librarian, Philip Larkin, in her writing ever since. This paper is completely rooted at the University of Hull and is being offered as part of what I call the viral archive of the pandemic, as a point of departure from the Before Times and as a site of return to disaster, rupture, and crisis. The Whitsun Weddings is the consummate literary locomotion. Philip Larkin said that the poem is asking a lot of the reader to achieve a climax, and that the poem should be read on a level, even a plodding descriptive note. He later described the poem simply as just life as it happened. Larkin's train is a vehicle of frail coincidence, of lives brushing against one another. You couldn't be on the train without feeling the young lives all starting off, and that just for a moment you were touching them. It was a marvellous, wonderful afternoon. It only needed writing down. Anybody could have done it. He supposes that the train stopped at about 4, 5, 6 stations between Hull and London, continuing that there was a sense of gathering emotional momentum of all this fresh, open life as an incredible experience that he had never forgotten. My own research on pandemic writing grows out of the problem of forgetting and the notions of observation and preoccupations with proximity during times of social distance. In 2023, alongside my supervisor, Catherine Wynne, we founded Pandemic Pages, a book podcast at the University of Hull designed to capture conversations about COVID-19, books, illness, and viral experience and culture as a viral archive of primary sources that have been written as a response to COVID-19. One of the questions driving both the podcast and my doctoral research is whether illness produces, as Virginia Woolf suggests in her essay on being ill, a poverty of the language, and whether pandemic narratives lack plot and narrative structure. So Pandemic Pages became a way of listening to writers talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and exploring how, to borrow Sarah Moss's phrase from her lockdown novel, The Fell, language is infected, and how COVID-19 has contaminated contemporary literature. It was through Pandemic Pages that I spoke to Yiyun. And so that conversation becomes a hinge in this paper, revealing how deeply Larkin has entered Lee's thinking and writing about her personal grief and the pandemic over the decade. So Yiyun travelled to Hull in 2017 to see the Philip Larkin exhibition curated by Anna Farthing. That journey and her memories of the Larkin exhibition are described in that essay, in which she writes, "A train makes a public stage for private woes." For context, in the Before Times essay, she is talking about a trip to see the Larkin exhibition in Hull, and then, 5 days later, her plan to visit the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst, Massachusetts. She writes, 2 trips, 2 poets, 2 permanent farewells. This is one way of framing a particular week in my life. It was September 2017, which seen from 2022 could nearly be called the good old days. Yet, so rarely do we look at the present, innocent of fresh disaster as a rosy before time. We live in the after time of events, some more catastrophic than others. Lee's agent told her, the day before she travelled to Hull, I think you would like to be on the train. Your body is still, but the train is moving, so you go through the landscape. That line could be easily describing Larkin's poem, where they move through and watch that landscape, sitting side by side, as he writes. It is the essence of Wits and Weddings, the body still, the world moving, the landscape sliding past in a series of framed, fleeting tableaux as a dozen marriages got underway on that sunlit Saturday afternoon. Lee's essay describes sitting across from a family as they play cards, laughing aloud when she points out to them that they have booked the quiet carriage. She says, she often thinks about the family on the train to Hull. Carved into my memory the way passers-by are accidentally caught in a snapshot. And I'm thinking of Larkin here saying, verbal photography. We were fellow travellers in the before time. What difference did it make that they were noisy in a quiet carriage? So as you can note, the trip cemented Lee's long-standing engagement with Larkin and Hull. On the podcast, she reveals that she only visited the Philip Larkin exhibition in Hull. She didn't go anywhere else. She didn't go into the library even, onto any other floor. So reflecting on the exhibition itself, she writes, the Larkin exhibition was in the University Library at Hull, where he'd served as a librarian. It displayed hundreds of personal items, his collection of ties, letters to his mother neatly stacked in a glass case, their contents protected from voyeuristic eyes, a minute Hitler figurine which had belonged to Larkin's father, the hardcovers and spines of Larkin's diaries, among them one decorated with collages of scantily dressed women cut out of magazines, the insides of those diaries which he had entrusted to Monica Jones, his longtime companion, had been shredded shortly after his death. She writes, in Dear Friend, from my life, I write to you in your life, that she wished she could have had a conversation with Larkin. She writes explicitly about the Wits and Weddings, specifically about Larkin sending Monica Jones an advance copy of Wits and Weddings without warning her that it contained a love poem to another woman. Examining Larkin's excuse, Lee says she agrees with him. She does not equate writing with real life either. So this refusal to equate writing with life becomes a shared principle between them. Lee's fiction around the COVID-19 pandemic returns to trains with a new urgency. In her 2023 short story Wednesday's Child, the protagonist, Rosalie, travels by train from Amsterdam to Brussels in the summer of 2021, just as the Delta variant begins to dominate. Rosalie is grieving the death of her daughter, Marcy. Rosalie notes the verb he used, not jumped or ran or leaped, but walked as though death had been an act, both leisurely and purposeful. Contrary to present circumstances, it was summer, and this was the 21st century. When eventually she boards a train, Rosalie sits near a tightly double-masked pregnant woman. The train passes villages with steepled churches, flower farms and rivers, canals alongside which cyclists rode as though in a movie. Sometimes a passenger got off the train, pausing on the platform. Framed by the window, they looked as though they were extras on a film set. The visual framing is strikingly Larkinian. The train becomes a viewing apparatus, a way of watching life. But where Larkin's train gathers weddings, Lee's gathers pandemic vulnerability, containing illness, interruption, motherhood, maternal grief, and death. The pregnant woman goes into labour mid-journey. Rosalie helps. Life and death occupy the same carriage. Lee told me on Pandemic Pages, it's funny because, I certainly did not mean to write pandemic fiction, but the pandemic happened, so stories happened. That remark echoes what Larkin said to his biographer, Andrew Motion, about Wits and Weddings, the quote I mentioned earlier, that it is just life as it happened. Lee's engagement with Larkin deepens when we consider her personal grief, why trains recur, why Larkin is a refrain. Her writing is both profoundly shaped by the deaths of her sons, Vincent and James, Vincent in 2017 and James in 2024. Both died by rail suicide. The train is not a literary device, it is a traumatic infrastructure. In Where Reasons End, published in 2017, the narrator, who is an anonymous writer, imagines having a dialogue with her dead son, reading him a stanza from the poem Larkin thought hardly a poem at all. Days. What are days for? Days are where we live. They come, they wake us, time and time over. They are happy to be in. Where can we live but days? But the son Nikolai replies, days are not the only place we live. In her memoir, published in 2025, Things in Nature Merely Grow, written after James's death, Lee returns to the same lines of Larkin, but it hollows out, steeping into the modes of loss and death. Where can we live but days, Larkin has said. The days after James's death are but an abyss. How does one live in an abyss? By marking time. Here Larkin's refrain becomes a mechanism for survival, a way of continuing without resolution. Lee says she did not seek out Larkin explicitly for the framework of her pandemic short story. So what can we make of the intertextualities? Is it just a frail, travelling coincidence? Or truly the subconscious emulation of Larkin's locomotion? Lee's account of her train journey to Hull and her summer travel to Netherlands during the pandemic reads as distinctly Larkin, echoes Larkin's canonical train sequence. So I argue that Lee's long engagement and fascination with Larkin, her movement through the terrain and tradition of train literature, and her journeys through grief and isolation carried directly into her COVID writing. In this sense, Larkin's influence is reactivated within the altered conditions of pandemic travel and solitude. So what is Larkin to Hull now, I ask her, in view of her visit to our university in 2017 and her inheritance of the man, the poet, our librarian? This is just one of the questions I explore in my conversation with Yiyun Lee on Pandemic Pages, and I'm sure you will be pleased with her answer. So please do check out the episode. And I look forward to your thoughts and questions. And this paper will be available to read with the Polyphony at the University of Durham. Thank you very much.